A female police officer, notorious for her racially biased behavior, brazenly pulled over a black man, suspecting that his luxurious car was stolen. Without listening to any explanation, she acted decisively, handcuffing the man right before his neighbors. What she didn't know? The man was a renowned judge, respected nationwide for his fairness and significant contributions to justice. The officer's shock was just the beginning when the truth was revealed. It led to far-reaching consequences she could never have anticipated. This wasn't just a personal incident, it was a stark reflection of the deep-seated injustices that still linger in our society. More importantly, this story reminds us that with courage and determination, each of us can ignite the flame of change, no matter how entrenched prejudice might be. Before diving into this deeply emotional story, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories about justice and bravery inspire you, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss out on more meaningful stories. Tomorrow, we'll bring you a special story you won't want to miss. The golden light of dusk spread over Somerset Hills, Maryland, with gentle sunlight filtering through the tall oak trees, creating an indescribable tranquility. The chirping of birds blended with the soft rustle of leaves swayed by a light breeze, amplifying the serene atmosphere. In this affluent neighborhood, smooth asphalt roads flanked by beautiful mansions reflected the prosperity of its residents. Driving through this idyllic scene was Ethan Carter, behind the wheel of a brand-new Audi, a well-earned reward after years of relentless hard work. Ethan, a well-respected judge, was known not only for his fairness on the bench, but also for his inspiring journey of rising from poverty. The new Audi was more than just a possession. It was a symbol of his accomplishments, a reminder of the value of perseverance. Inside the car, the scent of fresh leather seats mingled with the soft, strains of jazz emanating from the high-end sound system, offering a moment of relaxation after a long day at court. But today was far from ordinary. Ethan had just presided over a major case involving discrimination in hiring practices. A company was accused of systematically rejecting black candidates despite their qualifications and experience. The courtroom had been a battleground of intense arguments between the company's lawyers and the plaintiffs, individuals simply seeking the right to fair treatment. Ethan had meticulously reviewed every argument and examined all evidence with utmost care, knowing that his decision would not only impact the parties involved, but could also set a precedent for future cases. Despite fulfilling his duty, Ethan felt drained. It wasn't the workload that exhausted him, but the sense of fighting against a deeply entrenched system of prejudice that had persisted for centuries. As he drove through the quiet streets, where street lights had begun to flicker on, his thoughts drifted to the past, a past he had worked so hard to move beyond, but could never truly escape. Ethan had grown up in a poor neighborhood in Baltimore, where every street corner was a stark reminder of inequity. He vividly recalled an afternoon at 13, walking home with his old worn backpack slung over his shoulder, passing by a convenience store. A police officer had stopped him abruptly. "Hey, kid, what are you hiding in that bag? Hand it over," the officer had demanded. Coldly, his tone thick with suspicion. Ethan, confused and trembling, handed over his bag, which contained nothing more than a book and a few trinkets. But even that did not erase the officer's distrustful glare. His mother, alerted by a neighbor, rushed to the scene to explain that her son had just returned from school and had done nothing wrong. Yet the officer barely acknowledged her, dismissively warning Ethan, "Lucky for you, your mom showed up in time. Don't let me catch you hanging around here again." Ethan would never forget that moment. For the first time, he understood that no matter what he did or where he went, The color of his skin would always be the first thing people saw. That bitter realization ignited a fire within him to rise above and prove he was more than just a black kid from a poor neighborhood. He studied tirelessly, ignoring mockery from peers and skepticism from teachers. For him, becoming a judge wasn't just a career goal. It was a way to fight against the injustices he had endured. Though those memories had faded with time, they lingered like scars that could not be erased. Glancing in the rearview mirror, Ethan saw his reflection. A man transformed. From a struggling boy in Baltimore, he had risen to become one of the youngest and most respected judges in Maryland. Yet he knew his success could not erase the reality that countless others continued to endure the same injustices he had once faced. The Audi glided past houses bathed in the warm glow of golden lights spilling from their windows, exuding peace. But within Ethan, a faint unease stirred. He knew that the battle against prejudice was far from over, and perhaps never would be. Unbeknownst to him, tonight's journey would confront him with a new challenge, not only as a judge, but as a human being. It would test the limits of his patience and his faith in the justice he had devoted his life to protecting. Ethan Carter's Audi cruised gently down the deserted streets, just minutes away from home. He glanced at the dashboard clock, thinking of the evening he would spend with his wife and son, away from the strain of work. But that comforting thought was abruptly interrupted by a blinding light in the rearview mirror. The red and blue flashes of a police car shattered the evening's tranquility. Ethan furrowed his brow, more puzzled than alarmed. He was confident he hadn't violated any traffic laws. With years of experience, he knew compliance was the wisest course. Slowly pulling over, he turned off the engine and waited. The door of the police car opened and out stepped a tall, imposing officer with a purposeful stride. Jennifer Daniels, her face set in a stern expression, approached the Audi. The flashing lights illuminated her sharp gaze, cold and unrelenting. Jennifer was a seasoned officer with nearly a decade of service, respected for her strict discipline and quick decision-making. Yet, beneath her tough exterior, lay unhealed wounds from the past that shaped how she carried out her duties. Her father, a truck driver, had been killed during a highway robbery. Since then, Jennifer had been hypervigilant, especially towards luxury vehicles that seemed out of place. Tonight, Ethan's sleek new Audi immediately triggered her suspicions. She rapped sharply on the window with a gloved finger. The knock echoed in the stillness. Ethan rolled down the window, offering a polite smile, but Jennifer remained stoic. "License and registration," she ordered curtly without greeting or explanation. Ethan hesitated briefly, but quickly regained composure. Retrieving his wallet for his license and opening the glove compartment for his registration, he handed the documents through the window. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. Jennifer didn't answer right away, her eyes scanning the documents meticulously as if searching for discrepancies. She looked up, her gaze piercing. "We've received reports of a vehicle matching this description being stolen in the area. This car is a perfect match." Ethan frowned. "This is my car. I just bought it from a dealership a few days ago. You're welcome to verify the plates. Everything's legitimate." Jennifer didn't respond, her eyes sweeping over Ethan from his tailored suit to the smallest details of his appearance. To her, it all seemed too good to be true. A gleaming Audi, a well-dressed black man. She had seen such images before, but not in peaceful neighborhoods like Somerset Hills. "Step out of the vehicle," Jennifer commanded, her patience wearing thin. Ethan hesitated, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Officer, I don't understand the reason." "Step out. Now." Jennifer cut him off, her tone firm. Surprise turned into restrained indignation, but Ethan remained composed. Opening the door, he stepped out, his tall frame commanding attention under the glaring lights of the police car. Standing straight, he looked Jennifer in the eye. "I am Judge Ethan Carter. This is my car. I believe this is a misunderstanding." His name seemed to have no impact on Jennifer. She took a step back, her hand hovering near her holstered firearm as if preparing for the worst. Face the car, hands on the hood. At that moment, Ethan felt an unspoken violation. He had stood in courtrooms defending justice, but here on the street, he was just a black man driving a luxury car, a detail that, to Jennifer, seemed inherently suspicious. Taking a deep breath, he suppressed the rising anger. "Officer Daniels, you can verify everything before proceeding further. I have nothing to hide." But Jennifer didn't respond. She circled Ethan, scrutinizing him as if looking for any flaw or opening. Memories of her father's tragedy and past suspects flooded her mind, driving her actions tonight. For Jennifer, this wasn't just a job. It was a silent vendetta against what she believed the world had taken from her. The flashing lights reflected off the Audi's polished surface, enveloping them both in an icy glow. Ethan stood still, hands on the car, his mind racing with questions. Why was he subjected to this, here, in the neighborhood he called home? And why, after all he had achieved, did he still have to prove his innocence? Ethan leaned against the Audi as the police car's flashing lights continued to illuminate his face in a cold, unforgiving glow. The atmosphere between him and Officer Jennifer Daniels was thick with tension and suspicion. Taking a deep breath, he steadied his voice, maintaining as much calm as possible, though every word carried the weight of injustice he could not ignore. "Officer Daniels," he said evenly, his tone calm but resolute. "I've made it clear. I'm Judge Ethan Carter. I work at the Maryland District Court. This car is mine, purchased from a dealership just days ago. All the documents are in order." Jennifer stood opposite him, unmoving, her skeptical gaze unwavering. Her hand hovered near the firearm on her belt, a reflexive action that only heightened the tension in the air. To Jennifer, Ethan's story sounded too perfect. A black man driving a gleaming Audi in a wealthy neighborhood, it all triggered the instincts she had honed during years in law enforcement. "Judge or not, you'll need to prove it," Jennifer replied coldly. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Ethan froze, his eyes locking with Jennifer's as if searching for a glimmer of humanity in her gaze. He found none but cold detachment. "I don't understand the reason for this," he said firmly. "All the information you need is in the documents I've provided. You don't have to do this." Jennifer took another step closer, her voice sharp and almost commanding. "I don't need you to tell me how to do my job. Stand still and put your hands behind your back." Her tone, laced with unapologetic arrogance, struck Ethan like a slap to his dignity. Yet instead of retaliating, he turned his gaze toward the Audi, where the car's headlights reflected off the glossy surface like a mirror. In that reflection, memories from his past came rushing back, pulling him into a moment from years ago. He vividly recalled an afternoon when he was 16, leaving a tutoring session with a backpack full of books slung over his shoulder. His worn sneakers squeaked on the pavement as a police car suddenly pulled up, its siren blaring. Two officers stepped out, their eyes scrutinizing him with suspicion. "Stop right there, kid," one of them shouted. Startled and confused, Ethan froze. "What's going on?" he asked hesitantly. "We got reports of a kid matching your description hanging around this area. Hand over your bag," one officer demanded authoritatively. Ethan tried to explain that he was just a student and had done nothing wrong, but no one listened. He was pushed against a wall as his backpack was searched. Books and pencils spilled onto the ground, a symbolic representation of his helplessness against a system that refused to hear him. His mother had arrived just in time to defuse the situation, but the pain of the officer's accusatory glances lingered with Ethan for years. He had promised himself then that he would never let anyone, including himself, suffer such injustice again. But now, years later, as a successful man, Ethan realized nothing had truly changed. He stood once more under the harsh glare of police lights, treated like a suspect solely because of his appearance. Ethan looked directly at Jennifer, his composure beginning to crack. "Officer Daniels, you are crossing a line. I know my rights. You cannot detain me without just cause." Jennifer stiffened, sensing the defiance in Ethan's words. Yet, deep down, a small part of her began to question whether something was amiss. She glanced at the car's documents in her hand, then back at Ethan. Still, instead of retreating, she tightened her grip on her belt, as though the gesture could fortify her authority in this escalating situation. "I'll decide what's justified," she said, her voice remaining cold, though a hint of doubt crept into her tone. "Now, I need you to cooperate." Ethan exhaled heavily, suppressing a surge of anger rising in his chest. He wanted to push back, to speak out, but memories of his past encounter with the police held him back. He understood that any action he took now could be misinterpreted and worsen the situation. "Fine," he said, his voice low but firm. "I'll comply, but you will be held accountable for your actions." Jennifer took a small step back, her skeptical gaze unrelenting, though a flicker of uncertainty appeared. It was as if she was questioning whether she had gone too far. Instead of acknowledging it, she signaled for Ethan to place his hands on the hood and proceeded to inspect his documents again, this time with mechanical precision. The tension between them hung like a taut wire, every movement weighted with the burden of unspoken injustice that neither could fully acknowledge. The encounter was far from over, but Ethan knew that no matter how it unfolded, he would not allow this incident to become another haunting memory of humiliation in his life. The flashing police lights cast their glow over the quiet street, shattering its usual tranquility. Ethan remained still, hands pressed against the hood of his Audi, as Jennifer Daniels continued to scrutinize his documents, her expression of doubt unchanged. From the nearby homes, curtains began to shift. A few curious neighbors peeked out, their gazes a mix of intrigue and apprehension. In the nearest house, James Walker, an elderly man who had lived in the neighborhood for over 3 decades, stood leaning against his window frame. His silver hair and weary demeanor reflected the weight of his years. A retired history teacher, James was no stranger to tales of injustice. He had witnessed countless similar incidents throughout his life, and each one weighed heavily on him. James's mind flashed back to an incident years ago when a young black man was detained in this very neighborhood simply for walking at night. Despite the lack of evidence, baseless suspicion had turned an innocent man into a target. The memory now surged back, compelling James to act. Watching Ethan, forced to keep his hands on the hood, James could no longer stand idle. Adjusting his light sweater, he stepped out of his house and slowly approached the police car. The streetlights illuminated his thin frame, but his voice was steady and commanding as he spoke. "Officer, may I ask what's going on here?" James addressed Jennifer, his gaze filled with displeasure. "Ethan is my neighbor. He's a respectable man, and I can't see any reason for you to treat him this way." Jennifer looked up, momentarily taken aback by the elderly man standing before her. But she quickly regained her professional, cold demeanor, her lips pressed tightly as though refusing to explain. "Sir, please return to your home," she said sternly. "This is a legal matter, and I advise you not to interfere." James narrowed his eyes, his voice growing more assertive. "I'm not interfering. I simply want to know if humiliating a man in front of his home like this is truly necessary. If you need to check his documents, then do so. But this action seems excessive." Jennifer offered no response. Her eyes flicked over James before returning to the documents in her hand, deliberately ignoring his presence. But James's intervention was not without impact. Other neighbors began stepping outside, standing on their porches or peering from windows, watching intently. A few quietly captured the scene with their phones. The silence was palpable, but Ethan could feel the weight of their gazes, a spotlight he hadn't sought, making him feel as though he was being judged on the very street he called home. Jennifer, too, felt the pressure of the watching eyes, though she refused to show it. Accustomed to being observed in tense situations, she believed she was doing her duty. Yet, somewhere deep inside, a small voice questioned whether she had crossed a line. James refused to back down. He stepped closer, fixing Jennifer with a firm stare. "Officer, I've lived here for over 30 years. I know everyone in this neighborhood, and Ethan is one of the finest people I've met. What do you hope to achieve with this? If you seek justice, then be fair." Jennifer turned to face James, her jaw tightening. "I will follow proper procedures, sir. If you don't step back, I'll have to ask you to leave the scene." Ethan, standing nearby, felt a wave of frustration rise within him, but he forced himself to remain composed. "Mr. Walker, thank you for your support, but please, let me handle this." James glanced at Ethan, his expression filled with empathy, before turning back toward his home. Before leaving, he spoke one last time. "We're watching, Ethan. You're not alone." Jennifer watched James retreat, her emotions briefly stirring, but instead of acknowledging any error, she returned to her task. She lifted her radio, requesting another verification of the car's plates, as if searching for justification to defend her actions. The eyes of the neighborhood remained fixed on the scene, their silence now laced with simmering outrage. Ethan could feel the community's shared indignation, and he knew that whatever Jennifer chose to do next, the night's events would leave a lasting mark on the community he cherished. Jennifer Daniels stood beside the Audi, holding her radio but hesitating to speak. The words of James Walker still echoed in her mind. "If you want justice, be fair." The steadfast gaze of Ethan Carter, unwavering and resolute, seemed to pierce straight through her actions, making them impossible to ignore. A part of her acknowledged that Walker was right, but another, deeper part harbored an ingrained fear that had long taken root in her subconscious. Jennifer glanced around. The watchful eyes from windows, the glint of phones recording the scene, all seemed to judge her every move. She was accustomed to this, or at least she believed she was. As a police officer, she had faced far more harrowing situations, where every decision could mean life or death. Yet tonight, her usual resolve seemed to falter. Her hand instinctively rested on her holster, a reflex whenever she felt pressure mounting. In her mind's eye, the image of her father, Robert Daniels, came into focus. A truck driver with a warm smile and a gentle voice. Jennifer vividly recalled the last day he left home. He kissed her forehead, promising he'd return soon after making a delivery. But he never came back. A gang of robbers ambushed him on the highway, attacking him to steal his truck and its cargo. Robert resisted and paid with his life. Jennifer, just 17 at the time, watched her mother crumble under grief, their family shattered. From that moment, an iron will was forged within her. She joined the police force not just to protect others but to hunt down the evil she believed had stolen her father. Yet that loss left more than just determination. It planted a subconscious fear. A fear that those who owned expensive things, luxury cars, valuable possessions, might be connected to crime. So when the gleaming new Audi passed her on the road, Jennifer couldn't stop herself from linking it to her painful memories. Looking at Ethan through the rearview mirror, she saw only a cold, untrustworthy face. In her mind, the car and the man fit the perfect profile of a suspect. Something must be wrong here, she told herself. There has to be a reason for my suspicion. But now, standing in front of Ethan, his unwavering gaze unsettled her. "I'm Judge Ethan Carter," he said, his voice deep but firm, each word seeming to dismantle the last shred of her confidence. "This is my car. I suggest you call your superior to verify my identity." Jennifer bit her lip, offering no immediate response. Call your superior. Those 3 words felt like a challenge. She knew that doing so might lead to unpredictable consequences. Not just public humiliation, but also doubts about her judgment. Yet Ethan's gaze left her no choice. He wasn't someone who would back down. In the brief silence that followed, Jennifer felt caught between 2 worlds, one shaped by memories of her father, urging her to remain hypervigilant, and the reality before her, where the man in front of her seemed nothing like the suspect she had imagined. But what if she was wrong? What if this truly was a mistake? Was she prepared to admit it? She took a deep breath, her grip on the radio tightening. Finally, she pressed the button and spoke, her voice steady but faintly trembling, a tremor she hoped no one would notice. "I need to verify the license plate again. Send the information to Captain Monroe." The mention of her captain's name brought a slight quiver to her tone. Ethan remained motionless, arms crossed, his unyielding gaze fixed on her. There was no fear in his stance, only determination, as though he had seized control of the situation. Jennifer glanced around. The small crowd on the porches, the subtle movement of curtains, and the glowing screens of phones all made her feel scrutinized from every angle. Yet, what disturbed her most was her own growing self-doubt. Had she gone too far? Had her past clouded her judgment of Ethan from the start? When the radio emitted its crackling static, signaling that the verification process was underway, Jennifer froze. Each passing second felt like an eternity. She knew she was about to get an answer, but she wasn't sure she wanted to hear it. Inside, the walls of her defenses began to crumble. What if Ethan was simply a man on his way home, and she, with all her prejudices, had turned him into a suspect? Jennifer's confidence, the shield she had relied on throughout her career, began to crack. And as the static gave way to the voice on the other end of the radio, she knew that the truth, whether good or bad, would change everything in the next moment. The radio in Jennifer's hand let out a faint crackle, signaling that the license plate verification was in progress. But instead of waiting for an answer, she turned toward Ethan, her eyes hardening as she made a decision to act before the doubts in her mind could erase her suspicions. The tension in the air grew suffocating, as if the entire world had paused, bracing for an inevitable clash. "Put your hands behind your back," Jennifer ordered, her voice cold and unyielding. Ethan frowned, clearly surprised by the demand. "Officer Daniels, you're going too far," he replied, his tone still calm but now firm with conviction. "I've provided all the necessary documents. I've done nothing wrong." Jennifer stepped closer, closing the gap between them to mere feet. "I'm not asking for an explanation. I'm asking for compliance," she said, pulling, handcuffs from her belt. The small crowd on the porches and at the windows edged closer, their curious eyes now filled with shock and, in some cases, outrage. Ethan remained still, his gaze fixed on Jennifer. "There's no need for this," he said slowly. "You can wait for the radio confirmation. You can call your superior. But handcuffing me in front of my neighbors is unnecessary." To Jennifer, his words felt like a direct challenge to her authority. Internally, she wrestled with her doubts, but her actions were driven by an uncontrollable stubbornness. "Put your hands behind your back." "Now," she repeated, her voice sharper. "Before." Ethan could respond. She grabbed his wrist and pulled it behind him. Ethan did not resist, nor did he assist. He allowed her to cuff him, his eyes cast downward as if holding on to the last remnants of his dignity. The sound of the handcuffs locking was unmistakably loud in the quiet street, a declaration of public humiliation. The crowd erupted into murmurs. Some voiced their disapproval loudly, while others silently recorded the scene on their phones. James Walker, the elderly neighbor, emerged from his home again, his voice brimming with anger. "Ethan hasn't done anything wrong. This is a blatant abuse of power. Officer, you're humiliating a man without even fully verifying his information." The incident underscored the humiliation Ethan endured despite his status and reputation. What does this say about our society? Is there a way we can work together to change such prejudices? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Jennifer ignored James and everyone else. She held onto Ethan's wrist firmly, as if the act itself would validate her authority. But deep inside, she felt the weight of the judgmental eyes around her, a weight she couldn't shake. Ethan stood still, his shoulders squared and his gaze fixed forward, striving to maintain what little dignity he had left amidst this public degradation. But inside, he felt an indescribable pain. Despite all his life's achievements and the respect he had earned, he was still just a black man treated as a suspect, right outside his own home. "You're wrong," Ethan said, his voice low but deliberate, each word carrying undeniable strength. "I demand you confirm my information immediately. I am Judge Ethan Carter. If you don't believe me, call your superior. This action is unlawful, and you will be held accountable." Jennifer stepped back slightly, gripping her radio once more, though her hand remained on the handcuffs. She felt her hands trembling, not out of fear but from a growing sense of doubt. Yet she refused to acknowledge it. She couldn't. Not in this moment. "We'll handle this at the station," Jennifer said, but her tone lacked the firmness it once held. Ethan turned his head toward her, his eyes filled with disappointment. "You're not just humiliating me," he said. "You're humiliating yourself." The tension reached its breaking point as another police car slowly pulled up to the scene. Its lights dimmed, and from it stepped Captain Michael Monroe, the district commander. With his salt and pepper hair and commanding presence, Monroe instantly drew the attention of everyone present. Jennifer turned to face Monroe, her face betraying a flicker of uncertainty. Ethan, meanwhile, remained silent, his eyes locked on the captain. He knew Monroe's arrival could change everything, but would it be enough to erase the indignity he had just endured? The air was heavy with anticipation, as if the entire neighborhood held its breath, waiting for what would come next. But within Ethan, a bitter sense of betrayal was already taking root. He felt not just let down by the system he had once trusted, but also as though no matter how hard he tried, prejudice was an obstacle he could never fully overcome. Jennifer froze as she saw the patrol car of Captain Michael Monroe slowly come to a stop at the end of the street. The commanding presence of the captain, with his gray hair and composed demeanor, made the already tense atmosphere even heavier. A growing sense of unease stirred within Jennifer. She knew Monroe well, a man who tolerated no mistakes in his force, especially not the kind that could tarnish the reputation of the police department. Just minutes earlier, Jennifer had reluctantly pressed the button on her radio to request verification of Ethan Carter's identity. In response, a familiar voice came through. "Jennifer, this is Captain Monroe. What's the situation?" Jennifer swallowed hard, her voice firm but tinged with hesitation. "Captain, I've just stopped an Audi. The driver claims to be Judge Ethan Carter. However, the car matches the description of a recently reported stolen vehicle. I'm in the process of verifying the situation." There was a long pause on the other end. Then Monroe's voice came back, clear and sharp. "Jennifer, release him immediately." "Captain, I believe there might—" Jennifer started, but Monroe cut her off. "There are no might-be's. Ethan Carter is one of the most respected figures in this community. I will not allow my department to damage his reputation. I'm on my way to the scene now, but before I arrive, you are to ensure he is released and properly apologized to." The severity in Monroe's tone was unmistakable. Jennifer felt her stomach drop. She knew she had overstepped, but pride prevented her from admitting her mistake outright. As Monroe stepped out of his car, his commanding presence immediately drew the attention of everyone on the scene. His eyes quickly scanned the area, landing on Ethan, who stood tall despite the handcuffs on his wrists, his shoulders square and dignified. Monroe's gaze then moved to the silent, watchful neighbors. He knew that this incident had already gone beyond Jennifer's control. "Jennifer," Monroe said, his voice steady but laced with authority, "release him immediately." Jennifer hesitated for a moment, her hands stiff as they hovered over her radio. Slowly, she stepped toward Ethan. She pulled out the key to the handcuffs, but her hands, so used to cuffing suspects, now trembled as she unlocked them. The handcuffs were removed, but no one present felt relief. Captain Michael Monroe stood close to Jennifer Daniels, his expression a mix of tension and resolve. Ethan Carter remained upright, his gaze fixed on Jennifer. The weight of his silence was almost unbearable, as though every detail of her actions was being dissected. Jennifer took a step toward Ethan, her hands clenched at her sides as if trying to hold on to what little dignity she had left. She took a deep breath, and when she finally spoke, her voice betrayed her struggle. "Judge Carter," she began, trying to steady her tone, "I apologize for what happened. I acted based on the information I had at the time, and I now realize that I made a mistake." Her apology hung in the air, failing to bring the resolution she had hoped for. Ethan's gaze didn't carry anger, but it was filled with a disappointment so profound that no words could erase it. "Officer Daniels," Ethan said, his voice low but firm, each word cutting through the stillness like a blade. "This isn't the first time I've been treated this way, and the sad reality is, I know it won't be the last." Jennifer blinked, his words hitting her like a direct blow. Ethan continued, his voice steady but sharp. "I'm not just a man driving home. I am a judge. I've dedicated my career to upholding justice, to ensuring that people are not mistreated, especially based on their appearance. But tonight, everything I've worked for, everything I stand for, seems meaningless." Jennifer's head lowered, each of his words striking home. She realized that her actions couldn't be justified with a mere apology. Deep down, she began to understand that this was not just a personal mistake but a reflection of a larger problem she was complicit in. Captain Monroe stepped forward, breaking the oppressive silence. He looked at Jennifer with disappointment before turning to Ethan with a sincere expression of regret. "Judge Carter," he said, his voice heavy and deliberate. "On behalf of my department, I apologize for what happened. This was a serious error, and I assure you that we will thoroughly investigate. Not just this incident, but how my team operates as a whole. This is not how we should serve this community." Ethan remained silent for a moment, as though weighing Monroe's words. "I don't need promises, Captain Monroe," he finally said. "I need action. This isn't just about me. This is about a system that allows Officer Daniels and others like her to feel comfortable acting this way." Monroe nodded, understanding the gravity of Ethan's statement. "You're right. I will begin making changes immediately. But I also hope you understand that, despite everything, my team and I are committed to working toward improvement." Jennifer stood off to the side, feeling isolated in the conversation. Ethan's earlier words echoed in her mind. "Your actions didn't just humiliate me, they dishonored yourself." She realized Ethan wasn't seeking sympathy or explanations. He demanded change, something she hadn't considered before. Monroe turned to Jennifer, his tone sharp. "Officer Daniels, I will speak with you privately about this incident, but I want you to understand that what happened tonight is unacceptable." Jennifer nodded, saying nothing. She knew that any attempt at justification would only worsen the situation. The neighbors continued to watch from their porches and windows. Some shook their heads. Others looked at Ethan with sympathy. But all of them understood that tonight's events were not just about an individual. It was a sign of a larger issue in their society. Ethan glanced at Monroe and Jennifer one last time. "I hope, Captain, that your words lead to real action. And Officer Daniels," he said, locking eyes with her, "I hope you remember tonight, not as a mistake, but as an opportunity to do better." Jennifer couldn't respond, only managing a slight nod. His words weren't forgiveness, but they were a chance she dared not ignore. As Ethan stepped into his car, all eyes remained on him. The soft hum of the Audi's engine filled the air, but the silence left behind was heavier than ever. Ethan knew that tonight had been a confrontation, but it was also the beginning of a much-needed reckoning. He wasn't the first to endure this, and he wouldn't be the last. But he would ensure that this moment wouldn't fade into obscurity. The Audi rolled slowly into the garage, but Ethan didn't immediately turn off the engine. He sat silently in the car, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. His eyes were fixed ahead, but his mind was spinning with everything that had happened. Finally, he shut off the engine and stepped out of the car. The soft sound of the door closing echoed in the stillness of the house. But not everything was at peace. "Ethan?" The voice of Sophia Carter, his wife, called from the living room. She appeared in the doorway, her worried eyes scanning her husband. Her deep eyes were filled with unease, and her hair, hastily tied back, suggested she had rushed from whatever she was doing upon hearing his car. Ethan walked into the house, exhaling deeply as he set his briefcase on the table near the door. "It's nothing serious," he said, trying to keep his tone calm. But Sophia had known him long enough to sense when he was holding something back. "Nothing serious?" Sophia stepped closer, her voice sharpening. "Then why are you so late? I called, and you didn't pick up. What happened on your way home?" Ethan lowered his head, resting a gentle hand on his wife's shoulder. "Sophia, I'm fine. But yes, something happened. I was pulled over by the police." "The police?" Sophia interrupted, her eyes flashing with anger. "How? Ethan, no. What did they do to you?" Ethan recounted everything, every detail, every action by Jennifer Daniels, every word spoken. When he described being handcuffed in front of their neighbors, his voice grew quieter, but Sophia's eyes flared with anger she couldn't contain. "They humiliated you? Right here in our neighborhood?" she said, her voice shaking. "You're a judge, Ethan. You're not just some ordinary citizen they can mistreat at will. Did they even know who you are?" "They knew," Ethan replied, his voice soft but sharp as a blade. "But that didn't stop them, Sophia. That's the problem." Sophia turned, pacing to the dining table and bracing herself against a chair. "We can't let this go, Ethan. You need to act. You need to defend your dignity, not just for you but for everyone else who faces this without a voice." Ethan looked at his wife, seeing the anger in her eyes but also the pain behind it. Sophia wasn't just angry for him. She was angry at the injustice embedded in society, at the wounds she knew their family would continue to face. Footsteps sounded from the stairs. Jordan Carter, their 16-year-old son, came down, his face etched with worry. He had overheard the entire conversation, and though he tried to appear composed, his eyes betrayed his unease. "Dad," Jordan said, his voice quiet but serious. "They did this because you're black, didn't they?" Jordan's question stopped Ethan in his tracks. He didn't want his son to confront these harsh truths so early, but he couldn't hide them anymore. He nodded slowly, the weight of reality heavy in his eyes. "I hate that," Jordan said, gripping the stair railing tightly. "I hate that people look at us like we don't deserve the things we've worked for. I'm scared, Dad. I'm scared that one day this could happen to me." Sophia moved to embrace her son, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "No, Jordan," she said, her voice breaking. "We won't let that happen. We'll fight. We'll speak up. You have your father, a strong and fair man, and you will grow to be the same." Ethan watched Sophia and Jordan, his heart heavy. He knew that what had happened tonight wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a symbol of a greater issue, a reality his family, especially his son, would face throughout their lives. "Jordan," Ethan said, his voice steady, "I can't promise this won't happen to you, but I promise that we will do everything we can to make things different. Not just for you, but for everyone." Sophia turned to Ethan, her eyes full of both empathy and determination. "Then you need to start now, Ethan. You need to speak up. They need to know this is unacceptable. Never again." Ethan nodded, his eyes reflecting a newfound resolve. "You're right. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us, and I won't let this be forgotten." That evening, as they sat in the living room, Ethan, Sophia, and Jordan discussed what to do next. Sophia suggested Ethan speak to the media or organize a community meeting to share his story. Jordan, though young, expressed his desire to participate, to show that his generation would not remain silent in the face of injustice. When the discussion ended, Ethan rose and looked out the window at the quiet neighborhood. He knew that to protect his family and his community, this was just the beginning. This time, he wouldn't just be a judge in a courtroom. He would be a voice for change. 3 days after the tense incident, Ethan Carter stood in the small community center of Somerset Hills. The room was bright but heavy with emotion. More than 50 neighbors had gathered, filling the neatly arranged rows of chairs. Some wore curious expressions, others looked worried, and a few, those who had witnessed the event, displayed unmistakable outrage. At the front of the room, Ethan stood behind the lectern, dressed in a simple but well-fitted suit. Beside him sat Captain Michael Monroe and Officer Jennifer Daniels at a long table to the right of the stage. Both bore solemn expressions. Jennifer's eyes reflected a mix of unease and guilt. This was no ordinary meeting. It was an opportunity to confront the truth and seek a better path forward. Adjusting the microphone, Ethan's voice resonated through the quiet space. It was calm and measured, yet carried the weight of the moment. "Thank you all for being here today. I'm not standing here just as your neighbor, but as someone who has experienced an injustice many of us in this community have witnessed, or worse, endured." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, meeting the eyes of those who sat attentively. "That night, I didn't just feel humiliated. I felt as though everything I've worked for, all my efforts to rise above and serve justice, was erased, dismissed solely because of the color of my skin, and that is unacceptable." His words hung in the air, thick with shared pain. Some neighbors nodded solemnly. Others clenched their hands in silent solidarity, deeply moved by his honesty. "But I'm not here just to recount my story," Ethan continued. "I'm here to say that we need change, not just for me, but for everyone in this community, from children like my son, Jordan, to elders like Mr. James Walker, who have spent lifetimes navigating a society that doesn't always treat them with the fairness they deserve." Ethan turned his gaze toward Monroe and Jennifer. "We need a new approach to law enforcement. We need to ensure that police officers not only protect our communities, but also treat everyone they serve with respect and fairness, regardless of who they are or how they look." Light applause rippled from the back of the room, a cautious but encouraging response. The tension began to ease, yet Ethan's words had sown seeds of deep reflection. Jennifer sat motionless, her hands folded on the table. Inside, she felt a storm of emotions: shame, regret, and an overwhelming awareness of how far she had fallen short. As Ethan concluded his speech, all eyes turned to her. She knew this was her moment to face the community and herself. Standing, she approached the microphone. Her voice quivered slightly, but there was strength in her resolve. "I know my actions that night were wrong," she began, her voice echoing through the room. "I acted unfairly, and I take full responsibility for that. But I don't want my apology to end as just words. I want to commit to learning, to changing, and to doing better for this community." She took a deep breath, her gaze locking with Ethan's. "Thank you, Judge Carter, not just for your forgiveness, but for giving me the chance to make things right." Captain Monroe stood next, his presence steady and commanding. "As the head of law enforcement in this area, I'm accountable for the actions of my officers. I pledge that, starting today, we will improve our training processes, focusing on sensitivity and fairness in handling situations involving bias. Our role is not just to protect this community, but to build trust with everyone in it." He paused, his tone softening. "And I want to thank Judge Carter for ensuring this incident didn't pass unnoticed, but instead became an opportunity for change." A round of applause followed, louder and more resolute this time. Some attendees stood, clapping for longer than the others, a visible show of solidarity and support. Ethan felt a sense of relief, though he knew this was only the beginning. As the meeting concluded, several neighbors approached Ethan to shake his hand, thanking him for speaking out about what they themselves often couldn't. Sophia and Jordan stood near the back of the room, their smiles filled with pride and encouragement. Ethan exited the community center and looked up at the night sky, sparkling with stars. He knew the fight for justice wouldn't end after a single meeting, but tonight he had planted a seed of change, hope, and determination. And he would nurture it for his family, his community, and for everyone who had ever suffered in silence. After the community meeting, Jennifer Daniels quietly left the conference center, her steps heavy as she made her way to her car. She felt exposed under the gaze of the attendees, as though there was nothing left to shield her from their judgment. Ethan Carter's words echoed in her mind. "Your actions didn't just humiliate me. They humiliated your sense of honor." Jennifer sat in her car but didn't start the engine. She rested her head against the steering wheel, her hands gripping it tightly. The weight of disappointment, both from the community and herself, pressed down on her. For the first time in years, Jennifer confronted herself with no defense, no excuses. She replayed the events of that night in her mind. Ethan's steady gaze as he was handcuffed, James Walker's righteous anger, and the watchful eyes of the neighbors. She couldn't deny that every decision she had made stemmed from a place she was reluctant to acknowledge: prejudice. She thought about her father and the robbery that had taken his life. Jennifer had always believed that the pain of that experience had made her stronger, sharpening her sense of vigilance. But now she realized it had also colored her view of the world with suspicion and fear. "This isn't just about him," Ethan had said, and Jennifer knew he was right. This wasn't just about Ethan Carter. It was about how she had allowed her pain and fear to guide her actions, not to protect but to judge. The next day, Jennifer decided to visit Ethan at the county courthouse where he worked. As she entered his office, she felt like she was stepping into a completely different world, a space defined by respect, justice, and trust. Ethan looked up from his desk, his gaze calm but piercing. "Officer Daniels," he said evenly. "How can I help you?" Jennifer stood still for a moment, trying to gather her thoughts. She took a deep breath before speaking, her voice soft but filled with sincerity. "Judge Carter, I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here to apologize again, this time more sincerely. Not because I was told to, but because I need to." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He simply listened. "I was wrong," Jennifer continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I allowed fear and prejudice to influence my actions. I forgot that my duty isn't just to enforce the law, but to serve and protect everyone equally." Jennifer met Ethan's eyes, no longer avoiding his gaze. "I know an apology can't undo what happened, but I'm committed to change. I've signed up for bias awareness and community relations training. I want to learn to see people for who they are, not through the lens of my assumptions." Ethan remained silent, though his expression softened slightly. Jennifer pressed on, her tone resolute. "And it won't stop there. I want to work on improving the relationship between law enforcement and this community. I'm ready to listen, to learn, and to change." Ethan leaned back slightly, his gaze steady as he considered her words. After a moment, he spoke, his voice low but tinged with relief. "Officer Daniels," he said, "I accept your apology. But as you said, words aren't enough. I hope you truly uphold the commitments you've made." Jennifer nodded firmly. "I will, Judge Carter, and I know it's my responsibility to prove it through my actions." Ethan stood and extended his hand. "Then I'll be watching, and I'm here to support you, should you need guidance." Jennifer grasped his hand, feeling as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. Leaving the courthouse, Jennifer no longer felt lost or fearful. Instead, she carried a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to change her perspective, her methods, and even the system she served. For Jennifer, this was not just an act of redemption. It was an opportunity to become the person she had always aspired to be, a protector of justice, not through authority, but through respect and empathy. Meanwhile, inside his office, Ethan Carter sat for a moment longer, his gaze drifting toward the large window overlooking the peaceful neighborhood. Yet the tranquility he saw wasn't enough. It had to extend further and be assured for everyone, not just in Somerset Hills, but everywhere. A few weeks after the incident that shook the community, Ethan formally established the nonprofit organization Justice and Hope. It was not merely a response to his own experience, but the culmination of a lifetime of witnessing and enduring injustices, from a boy growing up in inequality to a judge and now a leader for change. The organization's goals were clear: raising awareness about social injustice through community education and workshops, training and reforming the justice system by focusing on bias training and trust building for law enforcement, providing legal support for victims of discrimination through pro bono services. Jennifer Daniels, after completing the bias training she had promised, became one of the organization's strongest advocates. She contributed not only her professional experience but also her willingness to stand as an example, encouraging her colleagues to join the effort. On a bright afternoon, in the large meeting room of the courthouse, Ethan led a discussion on justice and reform. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, highlighting his calm yet determined demeanor. A man who had endured every shade of injustice yet maintained faith in the possibility of change. The room was filled with a diverse audience, from police officers to lawyers to residents, all intently listening. Ethan shared his story, not with anger, but with a steadfast belief that the past does not define us. Rather, our responses to mistakes do. "We can't change the past," he said, his voice steady and warm, yet resonant. "But we can change how we confront it. We can build a future where justice is not a privilege, but a right for everyone." Jennifer Daniels sat in the front row, listening intently. For the first time, she felt not just like a spectator, but a part of the solution. When Ethan concluded his speech, the room erupted into sustained applause. After the discussion, Ethan stepped out of the courthouse into the late afternoon sun. He stood on the steps, watching attendees disperse, sharing ideas and stories, a sign that his efforts were not in vain. Sophia and Jordan waited for him at the bottom of the steps. Jordan approached, his smile brimming with pride. "You did great, Dad," he said, his eyes shining with hope. Ethan placed a hand on his son's shoulder, smiling. "I'm doing this not just for me, but for you and for everyone who comes after us." As he looked up at the sky, the light of a new dawn seemed to flicker on the horizon. Ethan knew the journey ahead would not be easy, but with each step, each shared story, and each change, he felt closer to a fairer world. Returning to the courthouse, the sunlight streaming through the grand window illuminated the wall bearing the inscription, "Justice for All." And with unwavering determination, Ethan knew that this message was not just a motto, it was a mission. The story of Ethan Carter is not just about an individual confronting injustice, but also about the power of resilience and the potential for transformation in each person. What are your thoughts on the actions of Ethan and Jennifer? In our daily lives, what can we do to help create a more just and equitable society? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share this video with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel to ensure you don't miss more inspiring stories like this one. Thank you for watching.